Also, did I miss any quizzes, reading quizzes?
Yes, so we'll have you, we'll figure out a time when you can make those up.
Okay.
But yeah, so, what was I gonna say? Yeah, we'll get through all of that. So I think first I want to give you a minute to look over the paper assignment.
Okay.
And ask me any questions that you might have about that.
I feel like I don't really have too many questions.
Okay, yes. It's the same basic midterm paper assignment that I always give. Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, let's.
When is this due? Does it say on here?
Yeah, the due dates are on the third page at the bottom.
Okay.
So yeah, the proposal is due on the 24th, and the paper is due on March the 3rd.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just take a quick minute, go over the vocab terms, and then we'll answer any questions you might have about Dorothy Wordsworth.
Okay.
And her sad and lonely life. All right. Okay, so tell me what the albatross is.
The albatross was a bird in the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner that, in my opinion, served as like a good omen. In a way, they were doing good. They were getting mist and wind, and the ship was sailing, and then he killed the bird.
Yep.
And then he killed his crew, essentially. I mean, like, he did it, but the crew died, and then bad luck, and everything
all
kind
of
of went
this,
to shit.
These spirits follow them out of out of Antarctica. Yeah, and so if we try to think about like what the significance of the albatross is there too, right? So does the mariner ever express any motive for killing the albatross?
No, he just killed it.
Yeah. It's just the killing just sort of comes out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
You know, the bird shows up and plays the sailors,
Yeah.
and then he kills it, right?
Yeah.
And if we connect that then to the way the mariner's curse can only be quote unquote lifted after he blesses the sea creatures, right? His killing of the albatross seems to be part of a larger lack of respect for other living things, right? Or lack of respect for non-human life. And given that the mariner might be a slave trader as well, that also suggests a lack of respect even for other human lives. All right, greater romantic lyric.
This is a type of, I wasn't sure, so my problem with your YouTube videos, and it's not like anything you're doing, it's hard to see what you're writing. So it wasn't as much notes I could take as I was just listening.
Yeah.
But I think I looked this one up, so honestly I'd rather you just tell me, because I hate having to look up the answers.
Okay, so the greater...
They're the same as yours.
Gotcha. So greater romantic lyric is a term coined by the literary scholar M.H. Abrams to describe poems like Lines Composed a Few Miles Above Tintern Abbey. And they all follow a similar pattern, right? They're poems that are about thought, But what's important is not just they're about contemplating some subject, but the way they contemplate the subject. Right? It always starts with observation of the external environment, which then is a catalyst for meditation about the speaker's present situation. And then that meditation is spit back out in a kind of changed attitude towards the physical circumstances, right? So it always follows, if then you find this helpful, an outside to inside to outside pattern. Physical environment, speaker's inner thoughts, physical environment again. Okay, is that reasonably clear?
Yes.
What I was looking for
Yes.
there. Okay, cool, good. All right. What about the wedding guest?
This was the poor soul who had to sit through the Mariner's story. I was just trying to have a good time at the wedding, but
Yeah. And this poor bastard is like almost hypnotized by the mariner, right?
Right.
And there's probably a whole riff we could do on eyes and the way, the eye is represented as being almost kind of hypnotic
right.
in that poem. But yeah, the mariner stops him, tells him this whole story, right? Which seems to be intended to inspire him to, go and pray and join in the community. But the irony is that in so doing, the mariners actually separated him from the community, right? Kept him from a communal celebration. And this poor guy's no happier after this revelation. It actually, the mariner's story depresses him and bumps him out, which makes him less likely to want to participate in some kind of communal activity.
Right.
All right, pantheism.
This one, pantheism, that was, I'm not even gonna try and guess, you just go.
Okay. So pantheism is the idea that God is everything, right? That is, like, that everything in nature has some kind of spark of the divine in it. And this is part of the animating philosophy of early Romanticism. So you'll see it in Wordsworth and you'll see it in Coleridge, right? It's an idea that they both share, at least early in their careers, before they both move on to other more conventional, old-farty kind of notions of reality. Okay, I get that ballad and lyrical ballads was also probably a little bit confusing.
Yes.
The distinction there. Okay, so a ballad, so the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is written in ballad stanzas. So ballad stanzas are these short, 4-line, sing-songy sort of stanzas. There's always a set rhyming pattern. It's A, B, C, B. And the key thing about a ballad is that it's narrative folk poetry, right? So it's not a learned tradition. It's not like the neoclassical poets, working on poetry as a craft, right? Ballads come out of oral culture, and particularly oral peasant culture. So what Coleridge is doing in the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner is giving us this kind of artificial version of a ballad by a learned, educated, middle-class person, right? But the idea is to try to mimic patterns of folk poetry and try to capture the authentic voice of the people. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What about life in death?
So I wasn't sure where to piece this together from, but I wrote, I don't know if you've looked at the quizzes yet or not, but I just took from what I read and then what I thought it could be is that I related it to the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner.
Yes, correct.
In terms of that either, I had like two possible theories in my head for what it would be. Was either that like there is life and death in terms of like literal, like them being kind of like the zombie ship mates, like doing their ship things, like dead, but there was still life there. Or it could be that they were perhaps like better off dead, and that there's life in death if they're just better off dead. Those were my guesses.
You've got the right poem here.
Okay.
Life and death is actually a specific character in the poem.
Oh.
When the skeletal ship comes sailing up next to them, right? You know, the specter, life and death was she, right? With the golden locks and the skin white as leprosy, who's throwing the dice with death over the crew, and she wins the mariner, so he lives in the midst of all the others dying, right?
Okay, so she was the. Was that like what they had referred to her to as in the book?
Yeah, she's referred to as life and death. Yes.
Okay.
All right, so the Wye River Valley.
This was a valley that was in Tintern Abbey. He was talking about it, but it's like a very big, like almost like river basin, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And it's actually real in real life.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's along the Welsh border, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, that's pretty much all I can think of right for that.
Okay, so the important things to remember at the Wye Valley. One, yeah, it is, it's the walk that Wordsworth is doing in Tintern Abbey. But it was a really popular tourist destination, right? This was a really, really popular walk for hikers. So Wordsworth would have been actually running into lots of other people on the trails. He just, ignores them in the poem.
Okay.
It was also much more heavily trafficked and industrialized than he presents it as, right? He kind of presents it as this place where, people are living in harmony with nature in their little cottages with their nice little hedgerows and all that. But there would actually have been, factories in several of the towns. The river would be really busy with traffic, not to mention all of the tourists walking up and down.
Right. That's funny.
So yeah, so he actually gives us a kind of false image of the place. And the picturesque.
This is just like very like I don't know how to describe like the picturesque, like it's like I don't know if it's specifically for literature, like writers being able to like depict what they're feeling and put it in writing in terms of like imagery and getting people to like picture what it is, but
Okay, it's actually something more specific than that. And it's something that, sort of particular to certain strands of romanticism, or kind of grows out of certain strands of romanticism. So when we talk about the picturesque, what we're talking about is ways that poets or artists will kind of put a sublime image, right? One of those images that's supposed to make you feel small or terrified, into a frame that kind of shrinks it down, right? So your experience of it is mediated by the frame they put it in. And so you get to experience the sublime without all the pants-shitting terror or the awe, right? And the reason this relates to Tintern Abbey is that one of the things that Wordsworth would have encountered on those river walks were these like different little scenic prospects where you could sort of pay a local entrepreneur a couple of pennies and they'd let you look at some some local vista from this vantage point they controlled, right? So it's a controlled, mediated experience of the sublime.
and it's specific to literature. Or could like someone, I guess, capture that in a picture?
Oh yeah, they can all. You will also see it in visual arts, and actually, when we look at Romantic Orientalism, we'll look at the way two artists known as the Daniels kind of did similar things in their tour of South and East Asia. All right, and I know that this is potentially confusing here. These last two are potentially confusing ones. So lyrical ballads.
Those were, it's a form of writing. I know that William Wordsworth used them in his, and then Dorothy was talking about him writing them in her journal entries. But you can just go ahead and explain to me what they are.
So lyrical ballads is actually the title of a book that Wordsworth and Coleridge wrote together.
Coleridge wrote it with him?
Yep. And it's the book in which Tintern Abbey and the Rime of the Ancient Mariner first appear. It's first published in 1798. And then goes through several subsequent editions. It is kind of like a surprise hit. But the big things to know about it, right? They're trying to combine like the lyric and the ballad. They're trying to combine these two things. They're trying to combine a learned tradition with folk tradition. The basic values of the book are a rejection of artificial poetic language in favor of trying to talk the way they thought people actually talked. I say the way they thought people actually talked because Wordsworth's diction is still not exactly earthy, right? And it's informed by their pro-French Revolution sympathies and their democratic beliefs, as well as their kind of shared pantheism, right? And this is regarded by some as kind of like the real kind of starting point of British Romanticism, though it's actually kind of channeling some trends that were started earlier.
So was that book like an accumulation of like different stories, or it was just one?
It's a collection of poems.
Okay.
And initially they didn't label which poet wrote which poem. And in fact, they actually produced some of the poems jointly. Coleridge contributed a few stanzas to some of Wordsworth's poems, and Wordsworth contributed some ideas to some of Coleridge's poems. Like, for example, in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the part about the dead man manning the ship was actually Wordsworth's idea, not Coleridge's. But yeah, so the way they divided up responsibility, and I guess that I should mention this because this is actually kind of important for literary historical reasons and also for the way both of them kind of saw themselves as poets, right? Is that Wordsworth was going to be responsible for the poems about rural life and habits, and Coleridge was going to be responsible for poems about the supernatural. So they were kind of coming at two of the big pillars of neoclassical poetry from different directions. Right? Wordsworth is attacking city life and social life by talking instead about rural life and solitude. And Coleridge is attacking the anti-superstition or anti-supernatural bias of neoclassical writing by writing poems about, zombie sailors and shit. And then the last one here, Pantisocracy, which I didn't realize this until after I wrote the quiz, is really easy to confuse with pantheism.
Yeah, so you got that. You have it. I probably got both of them wrong.
Okay, so Pantisocracy was the quasi-religious, quasi-political group that Coleridge formed with Robert Southey. And what they were going to do was buy land in Pennsylvania, in what is now Pennsylvania. I guess it was Pennsylvania then too. Yeah, they were going to buy land in Pennsylvania, and they were going to start a commune in which slavery would be illegal, which I believe was actually not yet illegal in Pennsylvania. Slavery had not yet been outlawed in Pennsylvania in the 1790s. So slavery would be illegal. Property would be held in common, and men and women would make decisions together on an equal basis.
Wow, they were ahead of their time.
Yeah, well, then they both harden into right-wingers as they get old.
Oh, great.
But like this is kind of in keeping with their the youthful radicalism we've seen from actually both of these poets. Southey wrote that poem critiquing the Napoleonic Wars. And in particular, the practice of impressing soldiers. And Coleridge, actually to pay for their Pantisocracy scheme, was giving those lectures on the abolition of the slave trade, right? Telling people to boycott sugar and rum. So these guys are radicals when they're young, right? Wordsworth goes and lives in revolutionary France for a couple of years. And then, settles into, married life and domesticity, and, gets, named poet laureate, and never writes another good line of poetry again, and, becomes, like Britain's Lord of the Old Farts, basically.
Wow.
Yep. Well, it's funny, like this older generation of romantics, they serve as an inspiration to the younger romantics, but the younger romantics, as we're going to see when we talk about Keats next week, right? They all die young. Keats and Shelley and Lord Byron are all dead before they're 35. Keats and Shelley before they're 30. And this older group of romantics, essentially, one could argue is that they live too long to maintain that youthful radicalism.
So Keats and Shelley died before they were even 30?
Yeah, Keats, I believe, died at 25, and Shelley at 29.
So.
Keats dies of tuberculosis, and Shelley actually drowns off the coast of Italy. Yeah, it's their stories are not happy ones. Yeah, in fact, especially, and again, we'll talk more about this next time when we talk about the Eve of St. Agnes. But Keats had also was trained as a doctor, so when he first exhibits the symptoms of tuberculosis, he knows exactly what that means and is fully aware of what's happening to him and that he doesn't have long to live.
Yeah.
Which adds, a kind of like an extra poignancy to a lot of his poetry. That that this is the work of a young man who knows he's going to die soon.
Yeah. Oh. Sad.
But he pumps out a lot of poetry in those few years.
Yeah.
He's very prolific. But yeah, speaking of sad lives of the Romantics,
Right.
let's
It's a good segue.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Dorothy Wordsworth and about these journals. So yeah, so you already noted before class started one of the difficulties of reading somebody's private journals is that when they're writing about someone they know, they don't necessarily write out for you,
Right.
for you, the reader. Oh, Samuel Taylor Coleridge dropped by today, right? He's just, he's C.
Yeah.
And, William Wordsworth is just W, right? She refers to these people kind of like as she would refer to them privately,
Right.
or in a form of kind of private shorthand. Was there anything else that struck you about like this kind of like this whole private writing thing?
I mean, she was definitely like a hopeless romantic, just in the way she I feel like described, and I don't even know if that was like a thing back, I mean, obviously like the romantic period, but like
Yeah.
the way she saw the world around her, the way she described like nature, like she was very in touch with I feel like earth and nature, and I mean, it did kind of feel like I was invading her privacy in a way.
And really, you are. It's, yeah.
It's interesting though that was her journal entries, and it was so good. It was just it wasn't casual. I mean, it was probably for her, or maybe she was practicing her writing in her journal entries.
Yeah.
But my journal entries don't look like that.
Yeah.
And she focused a lot on what was happening outside, her walks, where they went, what they were doing, her brother. But I don't know, it was interesting how well written it was to be a journal.
Yeah. She's not just jotting down a bunch of sentence fragments about what she had for lunch.
Gossiping.
Yeah.
She's talking about all the beauty of the world.
Yeah, well, and
then eventually she gets kind of sad.
and she has such a keen eye for detail.
Yes.
That her brother and Coleridge actually lift stuff from her wholesale, right, and put it into their poems.
Mm-hmm. I saw that.
Yeah, a lot of
footnotes.
Yeah, a lot of their imagery is taken almost verbatim from her journal entries, right? So, one of the reasons I want us to read this in this class is that she's a really important unacknowledged collaborator with these two really, really important early British Romantic poets.
Yeah. That's annoying.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. But I think, this is actually maybe one of the things we can try to talk about here is, why does her contribution remain kind of underground?
When did she die? I'm assuming, did she die before then?
I think she actually survived William by a couple of years.
So
she dies in 1855.
So was he taking her journal entries unbeknownst to her?
Oh, no.
Reading them, or
no?
She was sharing it with them.
Oh, yeah.
And just not getting credit.
Yeah.
Oh.
But she also doesn't seem to demand, if you look at the position she puts herself in relation to her brother, does she seem like the sort of person who would demand credit?
No.
Yeah, what seems to be her role with William? Or how does she seem to see her role?
In a mildly concerning way. Kind of
you picked
what
up
a
on that,
wife
yeah.
would take.
Yeah. Let's look here for a second on page 413, right? So before we get quite, the 1802 entries here, Thursday, March 4th. Before we had quite finished breakfast, Calvert's man brought the horses for William. We had a deal to do, pens to make, poems to put in order for writing, to settle for the press, pack up. And the man came before the pens were made, and he was obliged to leave me with only 2. Since he left me at 11:30, it is now 2, I have been putting the drawers into order, laid by his clothes, which he had thrown here and there and everywhere, filed 2 months' newspapers, and got my dinner, 2 boiled eggs and 2 apples. Okay, so she does talk about what she has for lunch, right? 2 boiled eggs and 2 apple tarts. I have set Molly on to clean the garden a little, and I myself have walked. I transplanted some snowdrops. The bees are busy. William has a nice bright day. It was hard frost in the night. The robins are singing sweetly. Now for my walk. I will be busy. I will look well, and be well when he comes back to me. Oh, the darling, here is one of his bitten apples. I can hardly find it in my heart to throw it into the fire. So, first off, what kind of picture do we get of William Wordsworth in this?
I guess just he knows it's gonna get done by her, so he's not gonna do it.
Apparently,
just like slob. Like, oh, my sister will get it.
I know, he sounds like somebody who just leaves his shit lying around all over the place, right? He leaves his clothes out, she has to pack them up and put them away.
Yeah.
He leaves, he leaves a half-eaten apple core lying out. It's up to her to throw it into the fire, right? She makes his pens for him. She files his newspapers, right?
What does that mean? Filing newspapers.
Oh,
Was that what did that mean back?
Actually, it would mean the same thing. Basically, she's taking the newspapers, organizing them, and putting them into a file. I'm not sure if they're just the everyday newspapers or if they're newspapers if she's like collecting clippings, maybe newspapers in which he's published a poem or in which his poems are reviewed. That would probably make more sense, I think, to me than just kind of collecting all of the newspapers and putting them in file in order. But we get the idea here that William is a slob, as you aptly put it. And how does she seem to feel about cleaning up after him?
Like she's happy to do so.
Yeah.
Like almost like it's her duty.
Duty is a really good word here, I think. So, as I think we've probably discussed in past classes, right? Around the year 1800, career opportunities are severely limited for middle-class women. The basic expectation is that you will attract a husband and then manage his household. Dorothy has a couple of things working against her in that regard. Right. One, she was a little bit socially awkward, right? Not real good at putting herself forward. Secondly, right, she's an orphan, which means there's no family to marry into, right?
Right.
This also means, what would a middle-class woman in this period have typically had in order to attract a husband, even if she were unattractive or had an unpleasant personality?
A dowry?
Yes, exactly. She has no dowry. So, her odds of getting married are quite a lot lower than would be the case for many of her peers, right? See, the problem was that all of the money that the family had and all of the education went to the boys. So William, for example, is the second son, and William's inheritance came to £900, which doesn't sound like a lot unless we consider that in 1800, a pound was worth about $120. So all told, like William's whole inheritance.
One singular pound was worth 120?
1 pound was worth $120 today. Today, yes. So, yeah, William's whole inheritance amounted to about $110,000. Now, this isn't, what we call like a metric shit ton of money, right? This wouldn't be enough to make him wealthy,
Right.
but it would be enough to maintain him in a modest fashion, as a practicing poet, right? Because poetry doesn't pay that well.
Right.
Surprise, surprise, right? Most professional poets, well, even the phrase professional poet, right, itself is a little iffy because most published poets have other sources of income, right? Either, they're people of independent means, like William Wordsworth, who have enough money that as long as they don't go crazy, they can live off of it. Or they are people who work some sort of other job, right? Like, the American poet Wallace Stevens was an insurance executive. The poet William Carlos Williams was a medical doctor, right? They've usually got some other source of income, basically, right? And yeah, William has this independent inheritance. Dorothy doesn't. So she is dependent, in some sense, on her brother's goodwill. But there's also a really powerful ideology in 18th and 19th century Britain that even an intelligent woman like Dorothy has a hard time kind of shaking loose from, right? So this is an idea called vocational philanthropy. So let's just try to maybe break down the term here. When we talk about, say, like vocational, as in like vocational training, right? What are we talking about?
I should know this because I recognize the term. Like I know, like last spring when I was in this class, we used
Okay.
vocational philanthropy. I remember learning about it, but I could not tell you what it is.
Okay, so vocation, well, I guess there are two senses of the word. Like one is, like a job, right? So like vocational training is job training.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah, it's what this is like high school. It's designated as a VOTEC high school. It's vocational technical.
Okay.
It's one that primarily teaches job skills. But a vocation in the religious sense means a calling. Right? And philanthropy basically means giving shit away, right? Lavishing your time, your attention, your money on some cause. So women, particularly middle-class women, are regarded as being called to give of themselves for no pay. Right, so this term refers to the expectation that middle-class women are called to perform acts of charity. And they are supposed to do this out of love, right? With no expectation of reward. And this is kind of like where like the whole idea of a like gendered division of labor in the Regency period comes in, right?
Yeah.
Men's work is regarded as necessary, right? Men do the necessary labor that's required to support the family. Women's work is done solely for love. So there's an expectation of selflessness and also of constant self-improvements. Right, so we can even kind of see this in like some of the moments where Dorothy describes what she and William are doing in their leisure time, right? So William might be staring into the fire or, reading poetry, right? He's, reading Spencer or reading Milton or whatever. While Dorothy will instead be reading and practicing German, right?
Yeah.
It's like he can read shit for fun, but she reads things that are supposed to, like they're supposed to be building her knowledge in some way, or that are supposed to be improving in some way. So do you have any questions about any of this so far?
Maybe one. So in terms of like vocational philanthropy, are we specifically talking like the expectation for women to like perform acts of charity as in like literal acts of charity, or does that fall into like them like basically just like, oh, if like a man were to come along and want to do something with her, that would be an act of charity? Like, was it corrupt in that way, or was it?
No, yeah. Sexual impropriety of any kind would be frowned upon.
Okay.
Especially like the middle class in any given society is usually also the most prudish class, and thus also usually kind of like the quickest to exclude or cut off anybody whom they don't regard as chaste, right? So yeah, so that would be a big no-no, right? Mm-hmm. But the idea that you might give charity to a beggar, for example, right? As long as they seem like a deserving beggar, right? That would be, the sort of thing you would do, right? But a lot of it is more about kind of taking care of your home and family out of love, right? Rather than out of a sense that you should get something for it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so much of this is kind of like within the household kind of stuff.
That's good.
But we haven't pointed to what's probably the weirdest and most troubling moment in this yet. But it's all tied up in this vocational philanthropy stuff, right?
Are you talking about when she was wearing the ring?
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought about that. Because I have a brother,
Yeah.
and I was like, I'm good.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's funny. Yeah.
Yeah, there's the closeness between the Wordsworth siblings is, even for the period, a little unusual, and has given rise to a lot of speculation.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Now, I'm going to try to provide an explanation for some of this that doesn't necessarily involve any kind of weird hanky-panky between siblings here. But, like, there's no way to know, really,
Right.
what happened here, apart from what she tells us. But yeah, so it's William's wedding day on page 418 here, right? Right. On Monday, 4th October, 1802, my brother William was married to Mary Hutchinson. Does that seem a little unusually detached?
From the way she was writing about him
Yeah.
prior, yes.
Yeah. She's using full names here for one
Yeah,
thing,
my
right?
brother William.
Yeah.
We know he is your brother.
Yeah.
But also, I guess she wasn't writing for us. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely something weird there.
Yeah. I slept a good deal of the night and rose fresh and well in the morning. At a little after 8 o'clock, I saw them go down the avenue towards the church. William had parted from me upstairs. I gave him the wedding ring with how deep a blessing. I took it from my forefinger where I had worn it the whole of the night before. He slipped it again onto my finger and blessed me fervently. When they were absent, my dear little Sarah prepared the breakfast. I kept myself as quiet as I could, but when I saw the two men running up the walk, coming to tell us it was over, I could stand it no longer and threw myself on the bed, where I lay in stillness, neither hearing nor saying anything, till Sarah came upstairs to me and said, "They are coming." This forced me from the bed where I lay, and I moved, and I knew not how, straight forward, faster than my strength could carry me, till I met my beloved William and fell upon his bosom. And then she follows them on their honeymoon. Right, it's
like, it's really sad, but it's also kind of like weird, but like also if I was William's new wife, I'd be like, get rid of her. I don't know. I don't know how, like, I don't know if I want to, like, if I feel bad for her, or if I'm like, maybe it's time you moved on from your brother, or... But also then again, like, she's got nothing.
Yeah, where's she
so
gonna go,
of course she's
right?
like super codependent on him and
absolutely
like, attached.
Yeah, she's completely financially dependent on him.
It's sad.
Yeah, and on top of that, she's basically been fulfilling this function of female head of household prior to his marriage. So, here along comes Mary Hutchinson, right? And, however much Dorothy might like Mary Hutchinson, right, they were friends, even, before William took an interest in Mary Hutchinson. This means that she's displaced now in the household, right? There's another woman who means more to William than she does, and who is going to be doing all of the things that Dorothy used to do. So it's probably not a terrible surprise that she ends up having a nervous breakdown.
Yeah.
Now, many years later, right? Mm-hmm. But it's one that's probably a long time coming. So she stops journaling in 1803.
So that is the entry from, okay, so yeah, that was 1802, so she stops journaling
shortly thereafter. Stops journaling altogether for the next 52 years, right? Does not write another journal entry. Right? She lives another 52 years after her last journal entry. Yeah.
So are all of these in like, was anything left out to make it like smaller, like of her journal entries here, like her, William and Mary were married, that was September 24th, and like a little bit after,
Oh,
like
yeah.
October, but then she writes again in December.
Yeah.
So I'm like, did she just not write right after they got married,
Oh,
or
no.
they leave like a few things out? Or
Yeah,
their journal entries?
these are excerpts.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So like you.
I would be, is there
Yeah.
any, like, is there her full journal anywhere?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
I
yeah.
want to read the whole thing.
Yeah, her full journals
I'm like-
have been published. In fact,
Invested in this weird little.
Yeah. An edited version that leaves out some of the juicier stuff is published in 1897. And then in the early 90s, a scholar went and kind of undid those abridgments and just kind of published something direct from her manuscripts that is more or less, as far as we can tell, the complete version. Yeah, or at least like, maybe she didn't stop journaling entirely after 1803, but no journals after 1803 survive, right? Which suggests either she stopped doing it or destroyed what she was writing.
Right.
Because it seems like she talks about showing this stuff to William, right? And we know that William, Wordsworth, and Coleridge saw her journals because, again, they borrow freely from them. But yeah, that's like the last thing we get here from her, right?
It's so
I know.
sad.
It is Christmas Day, Saturday, 25th December, 1802. I am 31 years of age. It is a dull, frosty day. Right? It's her birthday. It's Christmas.
That's so horrible.
And
Sad.
I know, and all she can think is to list her age and
And like
mention-
the way she described the day
Yeah.
compared to like her first entry.
Yeah.
describing the day.
Yeah, the entries do seem to get kind of shorter and less.
It's like there's less beauty. She's
Less
unable
for it,
to
yeah,
see
yeah.
less beauty in the world or something. That's
Yeah.
so sad.
And I mean, even like, the whole noting that she's 31 years of age has an extra weight to it too, right? Because like 31 doesn't sound that old to us.
Right.
I would happily be 31 again. But by middle class, late 18th, early 19th century women's standards, right? 31, you're long in the tooth, right?
Yeah.
You're ancient. If you haven't found a husband at 31, you're not going to.
It's so weird. That's so weird.
Whereas now typically the more education you have, at least in contemporary American society, the later you're likely to marry. But yeah.
So what did she end up doing with her life after this?
Well, she remains in William's household, and she continues to do a lot of kind of like the housework and care, and helps Mary with the management of the household, but it's kind of clearly in a kind of secondary role.
Right.
And then after she has that nervous breakdown, her personality changes, and she becomes demanding and petulant, and kind of like almost childish. And the Wordsworths continue to take care of her for the rest of their lives. I think William dies a couple of years before she does, but yeah, the family continues to care for her.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's so weird that these are like real people that existed.
Yeah.
They were just all up in their business.
I know, and because this is a journal, right? We're way more up in her business than we would normally be with one of these texts, right? But like one of the things about Romanticism is that it is like very much a kind of cult of the individual and of individual perceptions of nature, and of the world around you. Right? What matters most to a poet like Wordsworth or Coleridge, and even arguably to their successors, to Byron, to Keats, to Shelley, is the workings of the individual mind, right? How the individual mind processes what it's taking in. And I think like what we get mostly from Dorothy's observations of people in the environment is that kind of, it's a very detailed surface level observation, right? But she's not working it into that, processing part of it yet. That seems to be something she's leaving for, the boys to do. Not that she would be incapable of that.
Right.
But yeah, she does kind of that surface layer observation. And I think there's a pattern in her observations that I want us to notice here too. Like if we go back even like to the earliest journal entries we have here, right? She mentions, a great number of sheep in the field on page 409, only one standing. And in the next paragraph, she sees one solitary strawberry flower under a hedge. And this is a part of a bigger pattern in her observations, right?
Yeah.
She seems to have a real keen eye for the solitary, right? For the lone object, right? One of these.
That's horrible.
I know. I feel like I'm just making you sadder and sadder as we go through this together. But the solitary really seems to draw her eye, right? More than groups do. Now, the other thing that I just kind of want to quickly note here, because we're running out of time, has to do with historical circumstances. So she runs into an awful lot of beggars, widows, and orphans over the course of these journals, right? And these journals, again, like she's only writing them over a period of about 5 years. And she's writing them in a fairly remote country district, right? So just to give you some sense of where they are here, right? And you can turn on now, please. Thank you. You know that there's supposedly some way now that we can just leave that on and not actually have it broadcasting like a sleep function or something, but I haven't figured out how to do it.
Yeah, I'm not tech savvy. And here we go.
Okay, so the earliest journals, the Alfoxden journals, are written kind of in Somerset, kind of down around here, so down like the southwest coast. They had moved, the Wordsworths had moved there to be close to Coleridge. He had a cottage here in a village called Netherstowey, like one of those great British village names. Yeah, it's like one day, like I said, I want to retire to some rural English village, and I want to open a bar and call it the Vicar's Knickers.
I can see you too.
And then the rest of the journal entries are written up here in what's called the Lake District. 3 guesses as to why it's called the Lake District, and the first 2 don't count.
There's a lot of lakes.
Yes. It's known for its scenic lakes. And the Lake District is in a wider region called Cumbria. It's almost as far north as you can go and still be in England, right? You're practically in Scotland by that point. And it was kind of like this one kind of last unspoiled rural spot in the midst of large, in the midst of kind of large industrializing regions, right? So all the areas around the Lake District were kind of ramping up their industrial revolutions. The Lake District and the village of Grasmere, where the Wordsworths lived, remained pretty rural. So this is Dove Cottage. This is the house in which Dorothy wrote the bulk of these journal entries. Yeah, it's pretty, right? Yeah, it's cute. And this is what it looks like inside.
Is it like redone, or they tried to keep it as like historically like
it's a
similar as possible?
It's a Wordsworth museum now, so yeah, they've tried to restore it to what it would have looked like around the year 1800.
Cool.
And this is the kitchen. Dorothy would have spent a good bit of time.
Poor lady.
But this is what she would have seen.
Then she
day
was
to day.
putting some male coats on the ground.
Yep. A half-bitten apple. But yeah, so the reason why we see so many beggars in these journals, right? There are a number of factors, some of which we've already talked about. Right? One, the Napoleonic Wars. Right? On the one hand, there are a lot of men being killed, and then their families can't support themselves and have to go wandering. So, some of these beggars that she's meeting are, in a sense, like almost kind of these internally displaced persons, right? They're war refugees, but they're British war refugees, right? They're refugees created by a war that's not even being fought on British soil. The other factors here have to do with revolutions in British agriculture in the 18th century. So around the same time that the Industrial Revolution is happening, you've got these factories ramping up production of textiles and other goods that are now being mass produced and are thus now inexpensive. You've got a huge ramp up in agricultural production. And there are a couple of things behind this, right? One is what's called the Enclosure Act of, when the hell was that? 1773. So most villages prior to 1773 would have had like a village common or a village green in the center, right? Which everybody in the village was entitled to use. You could, if you had like a milk cow, or a sheep for wool or something like that, you could graze them on the village green. You could plant a small vegetable plot, for your own use on the village green, right? So it was common land that everybody was entitled to use.
And that was because of the Enclosure Act?
That was actually prior to the Enclosure Act. So this is before the Enclosure Act. Now, somebody got the bright idea that you could make a lot more money on this land if you replaced these village greens with livestock enclosures. So where you had your villager before raising one cow or one sheep, why don't we enclose that village green, and then the local landlord can just put a herd of cattle in there or a herd of sheep in there. And so what this does is disrupts the traditional communal life of these villages. Essentially, people are moved off the land for animals. And the animals are being raised for the profit of these landlords. So you have a lot of people who would have been, particularly the people who would have been most marginal in these village societies, right? Like, people like, small tenant farmers or, like agricultural day laborers are kind of left now kind of wandering from village. If they don't move to one of the cities to try to get a factory job, they're wandering from village to village, either begging or doing odd jobs where they can. You also have people who are victims of industrial accidents, who are they were working in a factory, they get injured, they can't work anymore. So so they wander from village to village begging.
So when the landlords would basically just like provide the cattle or whatever for the enclosures, would they charge the people around that were using them?
It's essentially the people around the green were just kind of told to shove off.
So who were the, like, what was the, who was getting to use that cattle?
The landlord was.
So just the landlord?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
What?
Well, remember back to our first session, right? In 1773, what percentage of British citizens were able to vote?
Like 2?
Yes, 2% of British subjects were legally allowed to vote. And you know, this is the kind of system you get when only very wealthy people can vote.
I'm so confused why that's a thing.
Yeah. Well, but
So like literally the landlords, so it was basically like not like an enclosure act, it was just like they have their own cows.
yeah, they have the cows, and then Parliament makes it legal for them to fence off the village commons and use it for grazing cattle or sheep or what have you. And on top of this, inventions like the seed drill and improved plows meant that you didn't actually need as many people to work a farm as you used to. So this also put a lot of agricultural laborers out of work. And Dorothy does, makes some observations about these kinds of people as well that she encounters. Yeah.
That sucks. I'm so happy it wasn't for, I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
What the heck?
Okay, so
Crazy.
that's
It's like very like I don't know, it just doesn't make sense.
Mhm. Well, I mean, basically,
Super counterproductive.
yeah, yeah. Well, it makes sense if the only opinions that matter in a society
Right.
are the opinions of 2% of the people.
Yeah.
And everybody else can just go fuck off, right? It's Alright, so that's what I have for you today, and I'm sorry it wasn't more uplifting.
It's okay.
Keats's personal story is a little bit sad, but the Eve of St. Agnes isn't a particularly depressing poem. So
Perfect. Keep riding this way.